And then I met Walt after that. I met him at his makeshift studio in Hollywood.
Hey everybody, episode 2 of Not So Small World. I'm Joe.
And this is Sam.
Yes, and we're back once again with 1937's Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. And as you can see from our little opening bit, we got to interview somebody who worked on the movie, which is kind of amazing. And if you want to go to this time code right here, you can watch that interview. But if you want to stick around for a little bit, we're going to talk about our thoughts after re-watching the movie. We're going to talk about some of the behind-the-scenes making of it, and just kind of our general impressions. Mm-hmm. So let's go to us before we rewatched Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. So, what movie are we watching today?
We're watching Snow White.
That's right. And
yeah.
what's your connection to this movie like? Did you watch this one a lot when you were growing up?
Not really. I think I watched it once when I was really young and then never watched it again.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay. So you don't have, like, the songs memorized or anything like that? Because in my family, we watched this one quite a bit. And so all the songs are just, like, imprinted into my brain.
I definitely, like, she was not my favorite as a young kid. Mm-hmm. I have no opinion towards her right now. Or I should say her, like, more towards the movie.
Once I realized that it was, like, one of the first animated movies, I'm sure that, like, young film nerd Joe was bragging a lot about knowing that. But other than that, I don't think I really had, like, I enjoyed the movie, but I didn't have, like, a deep emotional connection to it or anything like that. Wanna go watch it?
Yeah, let's do it. So after watching it, I had a brand new respect for it. I mean, not that I had any ill feelings towards it beforehand, but
right.
It definitely wasn't I didn't deem it my favorite Disney princess movie or Disney animated movie. But I definitely have, like, a lot more respect for it now, and I notice a lot more, like, artistic details that I wouldn't have noticed when I was, like, a little kid.
I also had a newfound respect, and there's, like, a scrappiness to it that I think I appreciate a lot more now that I know more about the making of it, now that I know more about just the history of animation as a whole. It's kind of incredible what they pulled off, I think. You said before your favorite was Dopey, right?
Yeah, I think when I was little, it was Dopey and Doc were my favorite. Mm-hmm. But now it's switched a little bit. I think adult Sam liked Grumpy a little bit more, and the relationship he had with Snow White. And
is Grumpy more relatable as an adult than as a kid?
Yeah, because, like, maybe I'm a little bit grumpy on the inside. I just kind of feel like he was the realist in this situation a lot of times, where everyone would be freaking out and he'd be like, no, like, let's go do this and actually take care of it.
When we were looking at, like, the old trailers for the movie, and every time they would re-release it, they kept on, like, they would say bashful, like, oh, he's so shy, and then they would get to Grumpy and it'd always be like, Grumpy, the woman hater.
And old sourpuss here is Grumpy, the woman hater.
And Grumpy, who thinks he's a confirmed woman hater.
Yeah, which is not why I like him, by the way.
We noticed over time they kind of dropped that. They stopped using it as a marketing thing. Actually, there was a whole big list of names they considered for dwarves, if you're ready for this.
Are you ready?
Because, the original dwarves in the story that they based it on didn't really have specific personality traits, which was kind of a clever thing they added to it.
So there's Scrappy, Hoppy, Weepy, Dirty, Cranky, Sneezy Wheezy, Hungry, Lazy, Dumpy, Thrifty, Nifty, Swifty. Is that Woeful?
Yeah.
Woeful, Doleful, Wistful, Soulful, Helpful, Artful.
I think it was Awful.
Ooh.
Which could be Grumpy.
Yeah. Snoopy, Goopy, Gabby, Blabby, Silly, Dippy, Graceful. What was that? Newsy? Nerdsy. Oh yeah, that was the weird one. Gloomy, Sappy, Flabby, Crabby, Daffy, Tearful, Fearful, Gaspy, Buzzy, Dizzy, Snappy, Hotsy, Jaunty, Puffy, Snotty.
Strutty, maybe?
Oh, Strutty, yeah. Biggie, Wiggy, oh no, it's Biggie, then Biggie Wiggy, Big O Ego, Jumpy, and Chesty.
And those are the ones that they, of course, didn't go with.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them probably for good reason. I don't think too many of those would have held up. I think
No.
one of the other ones that was in here that I wrote down was Deafy, which is very insensitive.
Yeah.
Speaking of insensitive, Snow White treats the dwarves as children a lot in this movie.
Well, and plus, like, she just encounters this, like, small cottage, and it's like, oh, only children could live here. You know, it's just so small.
Yeah, and she instantly starts like, oh, you don't know how to clean your hands. Let's wash behind those hands. Let me, it's bedtime. Make sure you get to bed on time.
Yeah.
And it's a very weird sort of, it's like,
But they're grown men with beards.
yeah. I think it was probably done in a way to like make them seem like not a threat, but still. I texted a friend of mine who's a little person. Shout out to Alex. And I asked him, like, what did you think about this? And Alex, who's a really talented filmmaker in his own right, said that he hadn't personally seen the movie in a long time, but he said it sounded like what we were describing was definitely infantilization, which is like treating anybody as like a much younger person than they are. And I think that was something I wouldn't have picked up as a kid that made me really uncomfortable watching today.
Yeah.
But the dwarves themselves are fun characters when they're not being
Yeah.
treated like children.
Oh, yeah. Well, but also it's like, it's weird because they are grown men, but apparently they're grown men who have never washed their hands or bathed. And, like, that's a little troubling, too.
You made a note that, like, when Snow White goes to sleep on top of their bed after she cleaned their whole house without their permission,
Yeah.
it's like...
Those nasty... Those nasty, grimy men sleep there every night and probably have never done laundry.
Yeah.
And she sleeps in their beds.
And then, like, there's all the animals that stomp on top.
Yeah.
It's kind of gross.
A little gross. Apparently the dwarves are rich.
They seem very rich.
Yes, and because in the beginning, like when they're introduced, they're mining, and then they just like, they're looking at all these like gems and stuff, making sure they're like the right, I don't know, they're the right quality.
Mm-hmm.
And then they just toss them into like this vault where there's like a bunch of other gems.
And they just kind of hang the key right outside the vault, like no one's gonna touch
Yeah,
this.
and then it's like a vault. And,
Yeah.
and like, I'm like, oh, okay, so like, that you have even a less of a reason than like not wash your clothes or not wash your hands and live in this. I don't know. It's
I
just
guess
like
so.
apparently they're rich.
Yeah, they chose a lot of actors for them that
Yeah.
specifically had routines based on it. So like the actor who played Doc had a comedy routine on the radio where he would stutter over himself and stuff. And then with Sneezy, there was a guy who his whole shtick was doing sneezes. It's
like
kinda,
funny sneezes.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy to think of the idea like you could have a whole career just basically playing one kind of character, one kind of
Right.
shtick. But if you're really good at it, like, hey, you might probably get hired for all kinds of radio programs.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing I really love that Walt said when we were listening to interviews with him was they were kind of like, he wanted Dopey to be like a dog a little bit.
Yeah.
But there was a level at which he was too much like a dog.
They literally could not find a voice actor who could do him justice.
Yeah, just
And
nothing
so
fit.
they just decided maybe he just doesn't talk
Yeah,
at all.
which made him more dog-like. But they didn't want him to be too much like that because, and that's why they have the scene where they're all dancing, which is such a great fun scene.
Mm-hmm.
He's really good at dancing, which makes him like less of just a nothing character. Like
That's his redeeming quality.
yeah, he's a little bit talented at least,
And I guess like they didn't want him to be like an idiot. Like
Mhm.
they wanted him to have like a dog-like nature where he's just kind of like he's just happy to be there. He's just
Right.
but he doesn't quite get what's going on either.
Yeah, and they kept on giving, they called it hitch stepping, where he's kind of shuffling with one foot in front of the other foot.
Yeah.
And so when they were doing live action reference footage, they had somebody who was doing that, and they kind of followed that in terms of trying to kind of get his movement to be different from the others too.
Their posture would suggest their personality in some way.
But what do you think about Snow White as a character, as a whole?
I think she's fine. It was cool to see where the trope came from, where like she must be a likable character if all the animals love her.
Right.
I
I remember thinking, like, as a kid, that she had just the weirdest voice. It's very easy to imitate that. Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
But like when we were watching behind the scenes and doing research and stuff, like apparently they thought that was a weird voice at the time. They wanted something that was a little bit magical or other, like outside of your norm.
And Disney was like really particular about like the voice too. he wanted it to sound like a young girl, but not like too old or too mature.
She's a very passive character. She reacts to things more than she does things. I think she still has more personality than Sleeping Beauty.
Yeah.
But you know,
but we'll save that for another video where we trash Sleeping Beauty. But I'm sorry.
I think she's okay as a protagonist, but I don't think when people think of the movie, they're not thinking about Snow White. They're thinking about the dwarves because they're funny and they're colorful, or they're thinking about the Queen because the Queen is awesome.
She's fine.
I love the Queen. I think she's a great Disney villain, and she helped start, I think, the idea of a Disney villain. This over the top, completely exaggerated, jealous, and she's, you know, she can do magic. She's, you know, she's dark magic. Yeah. She doesn't really have any redeeming traits. She's just over the top, and I think that's part of why some people love Disney villains so much. I mean, I think it's obviously now we're to a point where we expect more from villains and we want them to be a little bit more complex, and that's fine. But just for its time, just being completely over the top, completely evil, I really love that. And actually, we found out that the actor who played her, she played her both as the Queen and as the old crone when she transforms. And in order to play she was an older actor who did like a lot of vaudeville and stuff, but to play the older crone, she took out her dentures and would perform without that. And it's great, like both versions of her are so fun and so over the top.
And the character designer too, like he's actually a very talented character designer. And I guess when we're watching back, like behind the scenes, like Disney wanted to challenge him and gave him this character that wasn't like goofy and oddly proportioned. It was just like,
because he literally helped create Goofy, the character.
Yeah.
And so you think Goofy and the Wicked Queen like are so different.
But he did such a good job, and like the body language is so believable. And dramatic too.
I also found out she had a name, like Grimhild or something like that. They don't mention it in the movie, but it became canon.
Yeah, we don't know much about her.
Canonly. Yeah, it's we were saying too, it's like a very odd situation that like she has this castle, but there aren't like people there really. Like there's the woodsman.
There's the huntsman, and then there's Snow White, and then no one else.
It's just dead. And like there's skeletons there.
Apparently
so like
there were other people there.
Yeah, there were people there at one point, but I think that like I know that's like a weird thing, but I kind of like that. It kind of adds to the weirdness and the creepiness of her character that she's just in this weird, like seemingly abandoned.
Somehow they live together.
Yeah, and later on she would go on to inspire the Wicked Witch in Wizard of Oz in that portrayal, the most famous 1939 movie edition. The prince is even less of a character than Snow White is.
He's fine.
I mean, and again, we could go into the whole kind of uncomfortable conversation that regularly comes up with him kissing Snow White when she's seemingly dead. It's very strange.
It's leaning over and kissing a corpse.
No boundaries there. It is gross. Now originally we were finding out that the prince did have a bigger role in the movie originally, so they would have had a chance to make him more of a character, make him more of a person that Snow White pines over.
There were the last sketches where he was like super playful and like he would sing to her, and then she'd be like kind of receptive to it, and he'd be like, "Oh boy," and he would jump over a stump or something and click his heels or whatnot, and he just seemed like he had a lot more character in those sketches. But I wonder if it was like a time constraint that they were faced with, and they also said like he was the most difficult person to design,
right?
Because they had to use a lot of reference material back then because they weren't used to designing proportional human characters.
They had kind of experimented with it a bit before in some of the shorts and stuff that they would do.
Like Goddess of Spring, and but the figures weren't very impressive in that. Yeah,
the dwarves are like their comfort zone. They were used to doing these goofy Mickey Mouse style stuff. Yeah, caricatures, over the top and springy and and very expressive. But to do something with a bit more of a naturalistic kind of bent to it, like Snow White and the Prince and the Queen was a huge step forward for them, and I think they definitely improved from there on. Like, you can even see an improvement a movie later with Pinocchio, with Geppetto and stuff, I think. Like,
well, and even, I know we were like, talking bad about Sleeping Beauty earlier, but like you can definitely tell that the characters are they're better designed in general.
Sleeping Beauty has a much better balance of like realistic and cartoony, but like finding the good balance in between that, I think.
Yeah, and I think that's when they learned to experiment with style more.
Right. But one thing we also loved about the movie was the general style and look of the movie.
Yeah, and the backgrounds too.
Yeah, it's so like an old children's book, like it's
like an old German children's book,
right? Yeah. And there's a reason Walt didn't just bring on people who were in animation, because there weren't that many at the time. He brought in people who were cartoonists and people who worked
children's book illustration.
Yeah, one thing that we found out is that there was a guy named Albert Herder who brought a lot of the European influence to it, like the very gothic kind of look of some of it. There was also Gustav Tengren, who was more responsible for like setting the mood of it, where you get these cottages and
the scene where she runs through the woods too.
That scene is still so cool. I love that. And it's really interesting that Walt Disney told a lot of people working on the movie, he told them to watch movies that had very extreme, very experimental filming to them, like Nosferatu and Dr. Calibre. Calibre, I never remember how to pronounce that, but the styles of those movies, I was very surprised to hear that, because those are very weird looking films, especially for the time, but you can see it in moments like that forest escape, or in when the Queen transforms and stuff. It's very, like, there's all these effects, and it's very, I think very, like, still a little bit scary to this day. You know, like young Joe was a little bit scared of those scenes.
In the dwarf's cottage, they had all these like little details like in the carved wood and stuff, and you'd find all these little animals. Like you look over in the corner, like, oh, there's like a bunny face there, and it was like, it was kind of really fascinating. And I love the design of the instruments too, especially the organ that Grumpy plays. There's like all these little like mouths that pop open.
So in terms of creating the film, Walt kind of pitched the story to all the people at the studio. He had seen a version of Snow White, a film version, when he was young, and it kind of stuck with him. So that's, I think, where he got a lot of the boiled down versions of the story, really. He also really, he'd been going to Europe back and forth a lot and was getting a lot of influence from how they were telling stories. But yeah, apparently he gathered a whole bunch of his crew together and just kind of sat them down, and he acted out the full story from beginning to end. And one thing that I think is so mind-blowing, that like as we were learning about this, is that like a lot of the people making this movie were pretty much like our age, people in their early mid-20s, because they were just young people out of art school, or people that Walt would help like give them night classes so they could kind of you know, learn the ropes and learn from the other employees. And it's just crazy to think that something made by like a bunch of people our age coming together in a medium that was still so new at the time can last like almost 80 years later. It's just insane.
Yeah.
So story meetings were a little bit intimidating, but also really fun, because Walt would step in on a lot of them. And you have to remember, like, a lot of the people working on this movie were used to just doing goofy cartoons.
Yeah.
So a lot of the times they were working out the story just by kind of illustrating stuff like that. But they really stepped up to the challenge to tell something that had a little bit more heart, a little bit more scary moments mixed in. And apparently Walt would go after people had left, and he would go inside the waste bins and pull out stuff that people had scrapped away that they didn't think was good enough. And he would have them all pinned up on the board the next day and say, "This stuff is great, why'd you throw this out?"
Yeah.
You know, because they're a bunch of young people, apparently there were a lot of pranks going around, you know, buckets of water on doors and all that classic stuff, but also some like kind of over the top stuff too.
Yeah, apparently, like, they had these, like, drawing tables that would have light boxes underneath them, which are super, super helpful when you're trying to animate. And, like, they would, like, lift up the hatch, take a sardine, put the sardine on the little light bulb, and then close it again. And then Just leave it there.
And before you know it, they start smelling something weird, and all of a sudden there's
those balls get really hot.
At the time, unfortunately, women were not given the same sort of stature in the company as they are given now. And so pretty much a lot of the women who worked in the movie, most of them worked in the ink and paint, which is where they would have to go over the lines that the animators drew and like clean them up, actually make them look good, and fill in the colors and make sure they're consistent. So one thing that they did in the ink and paint department was they were testing out what would look good as rouge on Snow White's face, and they just couldn't nail it down. And one of them was like, how about I just use my own? And so she,
one of the women.
Yeah, so she just started putting, and there was only one of them that was like that good at placing it every time. And Walt was like, I don't know, like, can you get it every time? And they're like, we got this.
We know where blush goes.
Right.
We do it every morning in the mirror.
Right. So that's actual like makeup that they put on Snow White's cheeks throughout it. One of the amazing innovations that they created at the time for animation was the multiplane camera. And the whole idea behind that was when you're typically we're filming an animated shot, you'd have to just put the background down and then put the animation cell on top and just take the picture, line it up perfectly, boom. But instead, an amazing innovation that they started testing out right before Snow White was the idea of having this giant tower of planes that you could control. So you could have like 15 different backgrounds and like the character midway here. And so by doing that, you could shift the focus and make it look like you were coming towards it instead of just being like a flat image. You would have layers where you could start to blur one out like an actual camera would work if you were shooting it live action. And really the Bible, as far as we could tell, in terms of making sure each shot was correct, were these exposure sheets. And the exposure sheet was essentially every single shot planned with notes from every single department, where everybody who had an important thing about whether the camera was moving this way or the consistency of a certain character being there or shadows, or because those were all like special effects, things like that.
Right.
Or if you had the team that was doing like fire in the, so this was the paper that they would use to go through and make sure that every shot was exactly how they wanted it to be. Which
make sure it was consistent too.
Right. Disney's always been good at finding those like fun replacements for sound effects, and they were having a hard time getting the sound for the wishing well when Snow White is singing into it.
Yeah.
And how did
the echo sound?
Right.
Yeah.
So how did they solve that problem?
They went into the women's restroom and took a megaphone and said, "I'm wishing."
Yeah, they blasted the sound into there and recorded it back.
Yeah.
And it sounds good. So there you go. You're hearing a bathroom instead of a well.
Yeah. I can tell you after we watched it, like 5 times. No, we watched the movie twice, and then we watched the behind the scenes like
and the commentary
a few times. And the songs were stuck in my head all day. But it was not annoying. It was not unenjoyable. They're still good songs.
Yeah, one thing that they really stressed, as we saw in interviews, was Walt was like, especially at the time, there was no easy way to rewatch these films a lot.
Yeah.
So what stuck with you after the movie was long over? The songs. And so the
That's what he was
songs,
saying.
right?
Yeah.
So the songs had to be great, and I think the songs are amazing in this movie. I love so many of them. Some of them aren't necessarily important to the story, like the washing song or whatever. But
I think for the kids, they had to do that because like the dwarves are making these really silly faces, like you know?
they're having fun waterboarding, Grumpy there. But
well, he was a dirty boy. They had to wash him.
There's a reason why this movie is so remembered all these years later, and I think part of it is the songs. And how many? You have Hi Ho, you have the Wishing Well song,
Whistle While You Work.
Whistle While You Work. Like there's so many that people still remember, and even the orchestral music I think is really great. Like I was noticing so many little things where I'm like, wow, that's like really beautiful little piece that they're playing.
And that was something kind of unheard of for the time too, because they started timing music with the movie instead of just having like a song kind of just playing in the background.
Right, because sound was still so new at the time as a tool. We're so used to musicals today where the dialogue kind of slowly leads into the song. Maybe you speak the first line and then all of a sudden everyone's singing. that wasn't really like a big thing back then. A lot of the musicals at the time were just kind of awkwardly shoehorned in songs that had nothing to do with the plot. So the idea that these songs led into it, it really kind of set the tone for like what we think of as a musical in a way. Another thing that they had to worry about was money.
Oh.
Because this was a company that was mostly selling shorts to show in front of movies, and that wasn't really like a profitable sort of market.
Right.
And who was in charge of a lot of the money?
Roy Disney.
And who was Roy Disney?
Walt Disney's brother.
Mm-hmm.
Big brother, right?
Yeah.
Big brother.
And you get the sense that Roy had a lot of grief every time they would run out, and he'd have to come up with another way to make this happen.
Well, because Disney was the dreamer, like, like, it'd be so much better if we did this.
Yeah.
And Roy's like, no, we can't afford that.
We have to make it happen somehow.
Yeah. And there's even a scene in Snow White, and we tried to look for it. I think they might have removed it at this point. The image of the prince shifted a little bit, and
he was leaning down to kiss Snow White, and it like shimmies a little.
Yeah, and Disney's like, well, we gotta fix that. We gotta do it. And Roy's like, we literally can't.
It's like 1 week before the movie comes out.
He's like, it would cost like thousands of dollars to fix it. We literally can't.
So the quote that we saw was, "Let the prince shimmy."
Yeah.
So because of the money troubles, the budget got more bloated over time, and we kept on seeing that people said like it's gonna be Disney's folly or whatever, but it seemed like there was only one newspaper that was really as far as I could tell.
But they kept repeating that constantly.
Yeah.
Like, oh, we proved them wrong.
They were also saying like, I don't know if people are gonna sit that long for an animated movie. Yeah. But it became one of the most successful movies of all time financially up until that point. And it really exploded. Like the public ate this up. Like they loved Snow White.
Well, and didn't Disney buy a whole new studio for his company after that?
Yeah, he was able to pay off their debts that they got into while making it and make a whole new studio, which is the same area that they have today. After Snow White premiered, Disney threw this enormous party. It sounded completely bonkers as a kind of a thank you for the cast and crew, because it sounded like he was really close with them at the time. He thanked them at the beginning of Snow White. You can see it there. He started out like having all these games planned and stuff, and everything was going to plan.
Everything was scheduled.
It was scheduled down to the thing. But of course, these are like a bunch of 20-somethings who just want to party. So it sounded like it got completely out of control. There's an amazing Defunctland video about that if you want to hear more about that whole story. But yeah, I mean, what do you think the legacy of this movie is? Why do you think it's stuck around? I mean, we mentioned a few things.
I think it stuck around because of the legacy and because of the music. I think there's still people who really enjoy Snow White, like as a princess.
Yeah.
You know, and you know you can still find like backpacks with like Snow White on them, or like the drawers, and there's still like a little keychain. I mean, there's like still people who really enjoy the story. It's just really timeless, and that was what was really incredible about Disney's sense of storytelling is. It is timeless, you know. It lasts for ages, you know. Yeah,
it's like I think that's why they tell so many stories that are set in the past, is because like if it was a modern story, maybe it wouldn't have aged as well. I don't know. And of course, because it was one of the first fully animated movies, I think that also like at least the first one that was like massively successful, especially. It really not only set, you know, animation history, but Disney's history, and it was like it sounded like there was always that shadow for years to come, as like everything was compared to Snow White for the longest time. Everyone loved Snow White, and we got to talk to somebody who worked on it a little bit. It was really at the tail end. She did a little bit of cleanup, but her name is Ruthie Thompson. And in a couple months, she's going to be 110 years old. She lives out in California, and we called her. As we're recording this right now, the coronavirus pandemic is going on. So we talked a little bit about that with her at the beginning. The other context is she could not hear Sam at all.
No, it's okay. She was experiencing some she has some hearing problems, and I guess my particular pitch in my voice is it's hard for her to hear, so she could not hear me at all. So I definitely wasn't able to talk to her as much, but that's okay.
Yeah, but Sam did help research this and come up with the questions, so she's not just sitting there.
I swear I helped.
She worked at the company from the 30s all the way through the 70s.
Yeah.
And so she has, you know, just this long history, and seeing how it, you know, evolved over time it sounded like it was a really incredible experience. So please enjoy our interview with Ruthie Thompson.
Hi, Joe.
Hi, Ruthie. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good.
Hi, Ruthie. This is Sam.
Hi.
Are you staying safe?
No, we're incarcerated.
I'm sorry?
We can't go any place. We can't sit next to anybody. We have to be 6 feet apart.
Right.
And what do I think? I think the world is in a turmoil.
Yeah. It's pretty scary.
Are you guys being careful? Are you still maintaining your normal life?
Oh, yeah, we're definitely being safe.
We've been here in this condition where the doctors test us every half hour, and
Wow.
they check our temperatures and stuff, and mine goes up and down because I have temper tantrums. But I do it, you know me, I'm outspoken that way.
That's good.
But I'm inclined to sway a little on my opinion every now and then. I just want to let you know that I started with Laurel when I was 7 or 8 years old, and I landed in Oakland when the armistice was signed
Wow.
with Germany, and I lived with my great aunt in Oakland for 4 years, and then I met Walt after that, 21 or something. I met him at his studio, his makeshift studio in Hollywood, and I was among the neighborhood kids that he filmed, because he had a thing about mixing live action with cartoons.
Just for our viewers, can you describe what your role was like at the Disney company?
I started as an inker, but I didn't cotton to that. And they didn't cotton to my abilities either.
Ah.
So they put me in painting, and I went to night school and learned how they like to paint the characters with color models. The paint that we used had numbers, and we painted by the number. They asked a few of us, not all of the students, to stay on to help finish a picture that they were making, and they would pay us as a worker, and we all, the ones of us that were chosen, accepted and went in and as painters, and we finished the picture, and the picture was called I just lost it.
We also heard that.
Lonesome Ghost, that's it.
Oh yes, Lonesome Ghosts.
Lonesome Ghost.
I love that
That's
one.
the name of it. They would call us back when they needed help again.
Okay.
And a week or so later, they called, and I had to refuse because I had accepted a job at somebody's office answering the phone, and the guy had just opened his office. So a couple of years later, when I got through with that, they did call me, and so I went back. And that was during the time that Snow White was finishing and being ready to be produced. I got back in time to clean the cells and count them and keep track of them and stuff just for production. I didn't, that's the only kind of work I did. And I did a 24-hour shift. We did every 12 hours we traded shifts. And we finally got the picture finished and produced. And I didn't, if I painted on any of the Snow White characters, I would know, and I don't think I painted on any of them. I only helped get it ready for
Okay.
production.
We also heard that you're a photographer. How did you get into photography?
As a photographer, I did camera mechanics, things like that. I didn't shoot. I didn't press a button. I told the cameraman what to do.
Mm.
And if I missed, don't believe it. They turned me in. The guys just really jumped on me when I made a horrible mistake. Because when I finished setting up the mechanics of Sleeping Beauty, for instance, that's a picture that is shot 3 times in red, yellow, and blue. You know, all the pictures were shot that way, and you had to shoot it every time. You had to shoot 3 times. That's a technicolor process. When I went back, I was working on cartoons. He was doing fairy tale things, Charlie McCarthy, and we did something called A Brave Little Tailor. But in the meantime, while we were working on the cartoons, we started working on Fantasia and a couple others. I can't remember right now what they were. The camera department decided I guess I was able to be a member of the camera union at that time, and I was the first woman, I guess, one of them. And there was another woman that worked at Universal in the process department. She was doing a much harder job than I ever thought of doing, and so they took the 2 of us in as members. We're the first women in the union.
That's amazing.
I'd be standing around with my eyes popping out and not knowing what they're doing because all this stuff is way over my head. In fact, I can't even run my iPhone.
We also heard that after Snow White was finished, there was a big party at the Norconian Hotel. Do you remember?
Yeah.
Do you remember that party?
I was in it. I was at that party. I was one of the wild ones that went to the party.
Did you drink at the time?
Yes, we did. My only picture is of me trying to ride a donkey with my legs were as high as his ears. I don't know what I was doing. I was either in the business of falling off or trying to stay on one way or the other. And he was a small donkey, so I'm sure he didn't do much damage. I'm here to tell the tale.
We also heard that there was a tea room for you ladies. What was that like?
Oh, tea time. That was for inkers and painters. And the inkers don't drink coffee because it makes their hands shake. And their inking has to be accurate, absolutely on the button, tracing the lines of the animators.
Right.
And all the time that the inkers were doing that for the animators didn't appreciate them because they could find little flaws and everything, and it always got blamed onto the inkers. but you really had to be an artist to be able to ink, and the inkers were a class of their own.
What was the studio like during World War II?
World War II was when we moved from the old studios on Hyperion to the new studios in Burbank. And we had soldiers on the property. They lived there on one of the stages. The stages are huge. I don't know how many acres they are. And we were told not to fraternize with the soldiers. Of course, a couple of the soldiers and our girls got married. I remember that. They showed parts of a picture they were shooting. At the time, they were shooting Dumbo. And they showed the section where the mama elephant is in jail. And Dumbo can't find his way around, and nobody paying attention to him. And he was so sad. And he went to visit his mother. And she sang a lullaby to him. And he sat on her trunk. And she swayed him into, like he's on a hammock or something. And there was a song. And the song was so beautiful. I came out of the theater whistling the tune. And at the same time, Walt was coming back into the studio, into the animation building since lunch. And he said, "Did you like that tune?" And I said, "It's beautiful." He said, "We'll keep it." So that was that. That's one of my favorite pictures.
Dumbo is one of your favorites?
Oh, I like them all. I like Fantasia, and I like all of them. I like Jungle Book.
Yeah, we heard that the last one you worked on was probably The Rescuers.
I can't remember the name of that one either.
Oh, okay. Okay. Do you remember what the studio was like after Walt passed away?
It was an unhappy time. They picked a fellow to take his place, and he wasn't even close to being his equal. And the guy they didn't pick was the one they should have. We didn't hear that one. And boy, it didn't last too long after Walt died. We had a trip to Florida when it was right after Florida opened. And a bunch of us went to Florida to man the opening. And Roy called me in and he said, "Be sure and you get your eagle eye out, because there are a lot of things that should have been finished that weren't." And he wanted to know about it. So he asked me to sort of keep track of that. And so I did, with pictures and conversation in a little book. And while we were at the Disney World, Roy passed away.
Oh.
So the book was for naught, I guess. Anyway, the fellow that took his place just looked at it and put it aside, forgot about it. And I didn't pursue it.
Do you think the quality of the movies went down after Walt passed?
Absolutely, yeah. I don't know. It didn't flow. It didn't flow like a river should flow. You know, it hit a few rocks and splashed. Some of them get shelled early. Some of them late. He almost shelled Pooh, but Winnie the Pooh finally got over the hump and made it. The people that were hired to put the cartoon business on the market for Sargent Shore were Eisner and Katzenberg.
Oh, Katzenberg, yeah.
And the studio people bought him out. He wanted to be Walt. And Eisner said he wasn't capable of handling a theatrical production. Well, of course, he's proven that he is, and he has his own studio. But that's another story.
Yeah. Would you have stayed at the company longer if you had the option to?
The fellow that didn't take Walt's place, he was there to take it, and while he was taking Walt's place, he sent the edict out that anyone 65 or more as the date of October something, 1975, I think it was, are considered not here anymore. Something like that. And of course, I got offers from other studios. I finally accepted some, and I took several different kinds of jobs. But most of them are all concerned with camera mechanics, cartoon camera mechanics.
I also heard that you're a big Dodgers fan.
Yeah, now I'm a Dodger fan. Now, what with this scare that's got everybody, I don't know when we'll be able to act like normal human beings again.
Yeah.
I don't know. I can't go to the baseball game. Can't go to anything that brings a crowd. The guys who run those crowds, they're going broke, and because they depend on that stuff for a living, you know.
Yeah.
But they should explain it to the dummies like me. Okay, Joe, I thank you for calling. I thank you, girl, for asking. At least I remembered the Lonesome Ghosts.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's the most important movie of all.
In fact, I have the thing on my iPhone. Somebody got it for me and put it in, so I have it in my iPhone. But I can play it anytime I want to see it.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, we really, really appreciate your time, and we hope you keep staying safe.
All right, thank you so much, Ruthie. We appreciate your time. I hope you have a great day.
Maybe we'll shake hands one of these days. Who knows?
Thank you so much for watching our episode on Snow White, and thank you so much to Ruthie Thompson for letting us call her at her retirement home. We really loved talking with her, even though, obviously, like I said, I would have loved if Sam had more of a chance to participate. Okay. Our next episode is actually going to be Moana, as we're going back to the current Disney timeline. We would love if you wanted to share your thoughts on Moana in the comments, or if you wanted to tag us in a little video clip with hashtag #NotSoSmallWorld. Maybe we could include that clip in our next episode.
Subscribe to us. Tell your friends.
I mean, that's really the best thing you can do, is tell other people, share it with other people. And we would love, we're really excited to be working on this project together. And it's really cool opportunity to explore Disney history. And so if you know anybody else who's interested in that kind of stuff and wants to participate with us, by all means.
Well, thanks for watching Not So Small World. Until next time.
Until next time.